Her true story, from Ohio. My daughter-in-law said, "You have 3 days to get out, after my son's funeral." So I packed my bags and took back the house key. She thought I was powerless. I was just polite. "What are you looking for from me?" "That's your suitcase. You're a burden in my house." She threw my suitcase onto the lawn like it was trash. The sound of it hitting the wet grass was louder than I expected, or maybe it just felt that way. Heavy with years of quiet tolerance. Emily stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her tone as sharp as the wind that morning. "You have 3 days to get out," she said flatly. I didn't answer right away. I looked down at the suitcase. One of the wheels was cracked. The handle still had Daniel's initials stitched into the leather, back when he saved up to buy it for me before my trip to Boston. I'd used that bag maybe 5 times. Today would be the 6th. "You heard me," Emily added. 3 days. I've already contacted a locksmith. Still, I said nothing. Not yet. I bent down, picked up the suitcase, dusted off the mud. The zipper was halfway open. Inside were my folded scarves, my pill organizer, the envelope with Daniel's death certificate. Emily hadn't even closed it properly before throwing it out. When I looked back up at her, she was already turning away, as if it were done, as if I were just another piece of clutter to be dealt with, now that the funeral was over. I carried the suitcase up the short path to the curb, sat down on the concrete step, pulled out my phone. The first number I dialed wasn't for a taxi, or a friend, or even my cousin in Youngstown who had once offered me her guest room. No, I called the county assessor's office. "I'd like a property survey," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Yes, this week if possible. I'm the co-owner of a residence. I believe there's confusion about whose name is on the deed, because that's the thing." Emily thought I was powerless, but I was just polite. 3 days earlier, we'd buried Daniel, my son, my only child. Pancreatic cancer had stolen him in under a year. One moment he was working 12-hour days as a systems engineer and chasing Tommy around the yard. The next he was gaunt, silent, and tethered to machines that beeped more than they breathed. Emily had been composed throughout the process, too composed. When the nurse pronounced him gone, she didn't cry. She checked her watch. I stood at the side of his hospice bed, clutching his still warm hand, while she was already speaking to the funeral home. That should have been my first sign. At the funeral, she wore black silk and pearls. Not mourning, but a show of control. Every detail had been decided by her. I wasn't allowed to speak. Not even a reading. "It's better this way," she said. "You might get too emotional." Too emotional. At my own son's funeral. So I stood in the back pew like a stranger, accepted stiff hugs, answered whispered condolences with a smile I borrowed from someone stronger. All while Emily accepted center stage like the grieving widow in a play she'd written. I didn't cry until I got home, and I didn't scream until she threw me out. Emily and I had never seen eye to eye, but we'd survived each other for Daniel's sake. In the early years, she was civil, sometimes even warm. She made an effort, but it changed after the wedding. Daniel started calling less. I was asked not to visit without notice. I was told Tommy shouldn't be left alone with me unless it was approved. I was gently pushed aside, like furniture no longer in style, and I let it happen. For Daniel. But even he had started to notice. Once, when I brought a pot roast over without calling, he hugged me tightly in the garage before sneaking me in the back door like a teenager. "She doesn't mean anything by it, Ma," he whispered. "She's just stressed." That was always the excuse. She was stressed, busy, anxious. But I was grieving. I had buried my boy, and now she was burying me. From his life, his home, and his legacy. So no, I didn't argue when she evicted me. I packed my bags quietly. I watched her throw them onto the lawn like they were nothing. And then I called someone who remembered the truth. The surveyor came on Thursday morning, a middle-aged man named Cliff with a clipboard and no time for drama. I greeted him at the gate with a mug of coffee and the original deed papers Daniel and I had signed together before his wedding. "Joint tenancy," I said, tapping the line with my pen. "Filed 2018, before the marriage." Cliff adjusted his glasses. "Still active?" I nodded. Daniel never changed it. Emily's name was never added. She just assumed. Cliff whistled low. "Lot of folks assume they inherit by default." He walked the perimeter, took photos, notes. He'd submit the report in a few days, but we both knew the answer already. The house was half mine, and in the absence of a legal amendment or verified will, more than half. Emily hadn't asked a lawyer before tossing me out. She hadn't checked the title. She hadn't even looked in the fireproof box Daniel had once told me to keep, just in case. But I had, and now, her 3-day deadline had passed. I wasn't leaving. I was reclaiming. That night, as I sat in the motel room down the road, a small floral place with curtains that smelled like lavender and dust, I opened Daniel's laptop, the one he'd used in his final months, the one Emily never touched. He'd never changed the password. And inside, I found more than old photos. I found the first clue that something was deeply wrong. But that part of the story, that part was just beginning. They say a mother always knows when her child is hungry, tired, hurting. I used to believe that, until the day I realized I hadn't heard Daniel's voice, his real voice, in almost a year before he died. He was my miracle. I had him at 38, a late blessing after 5 miscarriages and 1 marriage that didn't survive them. Daniel came into the world quiet and observant, the way he left it. But in between, he was the kindest boy you could ever meet. As a child, he never needed much. Books over toys, laughter over tantrums. He was my little old man, always helping me fold laundry or read mail, trying to be the man of the house after his father passed. We were more than mother and son. We were a team. And I thought nothing, no one, could come between that. Then came Emily. She wasn't loud or cruel in any obvious way. She knew how to smile for photos, how to compliment the casserole. But her eyes scanned a room, like she was looking for something better than what she had. When she first came to dinner, she brought wine and a candle. I didn't drink, and I already had candles on the table. She noticed and never came empty-handed again, but always brought something. That was Emily. Sweet on the surface, but surgical in control. I remember the first Thanksgiving after they got engaged. I had made Daniel's favorite cornbread stuffing with smoked paprika, just like his grandpa liked it. Emily took 1 bite and said, "Oh, it's rustic." She smiled like it was a compliment, but Daniel never touched it again. By the time they married, she had him on almond milk, yoga, and emotional boundaries. He started saying things like, "I don't want to talk about the past, Ma, and we need to protect our peace." As if I were some intruder in the house I helped him buy. He used to call me every Sunday, then every other Sunday. Then, "Let's just text, okay?" And I let it happen. That's the part that keeps me up some nights. I let it slip away because I thought it was what good mothers do, let their sons build their own lives, even if it meant being left behind. But even while I stepped back, I kept watching how Emily ran the show, from finances to furniture. How Daniel, who once argued with teachers on behalf of bullied kids, now looked at me for permission to speak. How he'd hesitate before inviting me to their house, like it required clearance. When they had Tommy, I thought, maybe now I'd be needed again. And for a little while I was. Emily had a C-section and needed help. I cooked, cleaned, stayed up with the baby. I slept in the nursery for 2 weeks so they could rest. I loved that baby like I'd birthed him myself. But as soon as Emily recovered, the warmth disappeared. I'd arrive and find the door already locked from the inside. She'd say things like, "Tommy's overstimulated today," or "We're having a screen-free afternoon," when I'd ask to show him old family videos. Then Daniel got sick. He called me after a doctor's visit, his voice husky, hesitant. "They found something," he said. "Pancreas, stage 4. I didn't know what to say. I stood in the kitchen with a dish towel in one hand and a potato in the other, frozen. "Oh, baby," I whispered. He didn't cry. Daniel never cried. But I did. After the call ended, I sat on the floor and wept into that towel like it could erase the truth. I moved in a week later, into the guest room. I offered to pay rent. Emily waved me off, but not with kindness, more like dismissal. "Just don't make extra work for me," she said. "We have a nurse coming twice a week." She meant well, I told myself. Stress does strange things to people. But as the months wore on, I noticed patterns. She never took notes at the doctor's visits. Always said, "It's too much for Daniel to hear the details." But Daniel never asked for the details. He just nodded, numbly, trusting. One day I asked him, "Do you know what the latest scans say?" He looked at me with tired eyes. "I don't ask, Ma. Emily says I should just focus on feeling good. But he wasn't feeling good. He was shrinking, suffering, dying. I tried to bring up alternative treatments once. Emily shot it down instantly. We're following the doctor's plan. Let's not confuse him with false hope. False hope. That phrase rang in my ears for days. Not let's stay positive. Not whatever helps. No, false hope. Like she wanted him resigned, quiet. And Daniel became exactly that. In the final weeks he barely spoke. The nurse said he wasn't in pain, just sedated. Emily said he didn't want visitors. But once, I snuck into his room at night. He was awake, eyes glassy, fingers twitching. I held his hand and said, "It's okay, baby. I'm here." His lips moved, barely a whisper. I leaned in. That's all he said. Then his eyes closed. It wasn't peace. It was surrender. At the funeral, Emily wore black silk and a blank face. She read a prepared statement about how Daniel was a light in her life and her calm in the storm. Not a word about me. Not a mention of his childhood or who he was before he met her. I was placed at the back, told the family area was limited seating. Emily's parents were front and center. I left early, back home. I found his baby shoes in a memory box, the tiny pair of blue booties I saved from the hospital. And for the first time in years, I didn't just cry. I raged, quietly, inside, because this wasn't just loss. It was erasure, and I had a feeling, deep in my bones, that Daniel didn't just fade away. He was helped, not by me, by the woman who now held his house, his child, and his name. But not for long. Grief doesn't walk in a straight line. It loops. It crawls back in the middle of the night, taps on your shoulder while you're doing dishes, whispers in the silence between commercials. After Daniel's funeral, my grief didn't howl, it itched. Itched like something unfinished, something unjust. Emily had tossed me out of their home like a house guest who overstayed her welcome. She gave me 3 days. 3. Not out of urgency, but authority. As if it had always been her house, her life, her husband. But she forgot one thing. Daniel never changed his passwords. Not the one for his laptop. Not the one for the cloud storage I helped him set up years ago. He never gave them to Emily. "She's not great with tech," he'd said. "You know how she gets when the printer jams." So, on the night I moved back to my own place, the one-bedroom rental above the florist shop, I pulled out Daniel's old MacBook. The screen was cracked, the charger frayed, but it turned on. The password? Spaghetti 1994. His favorite meal, the year he won the science fair. I felt my throat tighten. He hadn't changed a thing. Inside, I found folders, tax documents, emails, old music files, then a subfolder labeled Cambridge. That's where he'd kept everything from the last few months of his life. Scans, prescriptions, insurance letters. But one file caught my eye. Emily_trips_2023. GJ. I clicked it, and there she was, Emily, laughing, head tilted back, one arm wrapped around a man I didn't recognize. They stood on a beach, sun setting behind them. He was tan, fit, mid-30s maybe. She was wearing a red one-piece swimsuit, the same one she had on a week before Daniel died. I remembered because she came home from a weekend at the spa with her cousin. But this wasn't a spa, and that man wasn't family. My hands began to tremble. I scrolled. More photos. Emily in a robe on a hotel balcony. Emily sipping champagne. Emily holding the man's hand. The timestamps were brutal. April 3rd, Daniel was in hospice, vomiting daily. April 4th, Emily was kissing a man on a boat. April 5th, Daniel's breathing began to slow. April 6th, Emily was back home, dressed in black, standing beside me at the funeral planning, and smiling in the photos. Smiling, I backed away from the screen. The chair creaked. My stomach turned. I should have felt rage, but I felt something worse. Recognition. All those nights Emily claimed to be stepping out to clear her head. The missed hospice visits. The late returns smelling of citrus and sweat. I had explained it away as stress, as her coping mechanism. But the truth had been there, in front of me, pixel by pixel. She wasn't grieving. She was free. And Daniel? He'd never known. Or maybe he had, but didn't have the strength to speak it. I opened the email archive, typed in the name I found from one of the photo tags, Jonathan Larkin. Nothing from Daniel, but I switched to Emily's name. Dozens of messages forwarded from her to Daniel. Clipped, impersonal, medical. No warmth, no signatures. But then I checked the sent folder. Daniel had drafted a message 2 weeks before he passed. It was never sent. If you're reading this, I guess I couldn't find the words. Something's off. I feel like Emily's lying to me about the money, about the will. She doesn't want me to talk to anyone but her doctor. I'm scared, but too tired to argue. Please, if anything happens, don't let her get away with it. I love you. The cursor blinked at the end of the unsent message. He had saved it but not sent it. Was he afraid? Drugged? Or did Emily see him type it? I didn't know. But now I had motive. I had photos. I had suspicion turned evidence. And I wasn't done. The next morning I walked to the local library, the one with dusty shelves and a printer that always jammed. I asked the librarian, a retired teacher who remembered Daniel's spelling bee win, if I could use the computer. I searched public records, real estate transfers, power of attorney filings, death certificates, and there it was. Daniel's will filed 2 days before he passed, witnessed by one of Emily's co-workers, signed by Daniel Thompson in shaky script. I pulled up his last known handwriting, a birthday card he'd mailed me the month before. The signatures didn't match. My heart pounded. She'd forged it. She'd faked the very document that gave her my son's house, his assets, even guardianship over Tommy. Now I had 3 things: motive, method, and mistake. But I needed backup, so I made a call, one I hadn't made in years, to someone who used to owe me a favor. If you think the elderly are slow, you've never seen a group of old friends smell a scandal. It had been years since I last saw Max, Jean, and Robbie in the same room, a trio of sharp minds with weathered faces and sharper memories. We used to joke that if we ever formed a club, we'd call it the Wrinkle Watchdogs. We never did, but I always knew the day might come when I'd need their particular set of skills. Max was a defense attorney for 42 years. Retired now, but his garage was still cluttered with boxes of case files he refused to shred. Just in case the truth ever needed revisiting, he always said. Jean had worked for the Ohio Ledger, the kind of reporter who didn't ask for permission, only forgiveness. She got fired 3 times and rehired twice. Her Rolodex was bigger than her retirement check. And Robbie? He'd spent most of his life in the shadows, a private investigator known for digging up dirt on politicians and crooked businessmen. The man could track a squirrel through a blizzard. I called Max first. I need help, I said. He didn't ask why. Just said, my place, Tuesday, bring pie. When I arrived, Jean and Robbie were already there. Jean had brought coffee and a folder labeled possible felony. Robbie was eating sunflower seeds like he had all the time in the world. So, Max began, adjusting his reading glasses. Who's the target? Emily, I said. My daughter-in-law. Jean raised an eyebrow. That statue of politeness with the fake laugh? I nodded. Then I told them everything. The photos, the forged will, the email Daniel never sent, the way she'd isolated him, the way she'd tossed me out before his body was cold. By the end of it, Jean's jaw was clenched tight. Max was already scribbling on a legal pad. Robbie had stopped chewing. You're saying she used his illness to lock down his assets while sleeping with another man? Robbie asked. I nodded. And I think she faked the will. God damn, Max leaned back. I've seen CEOs do less damage with more lawyers. She's sloppy, Jean said. That means we can catch her. I looked at each of them. My voice didn't shake. Will you help me? Max folded his arms. Let's split it up. He pointed to Jean. You look into Jonathan Larkin, social media, tax records, anything sketchy. Find out who he is, how long he's been around. To Robbie, you get access to Daniel's medical records. Quietly. I want to know who signed off on what and when. Then he turned to me. And you, Ruth, you stay calm. No calls. No confrontation. Not yet. Dawn smirked. Oh, she's not going to confront. She's going to outlive and outsmart. I smiled. That's the plan. And just like that, the Wrinkle Watchdogs were back in business. It took less than 2 weeks for the truth to crawl out from under its polished surface. John was the first to strike gold. He's not just a fling, she told me over the phone, her voice hard with disbelief. Jonathan Larkin's been around for 3 years, Ruth. They met at some real estate seminar in Columbus. And guess what? Well, he listed Emily as an emergency contact at his private gym. She's been paying his membership for 2 years, in cash. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. What else? He has no job, none, just a lease in his name. One Emily co-sigged. She's been bankrolling him. The words felt like stones in my stomach. While Daniel was sick, Jean didn't answer. She didn't need to. Meanwhile, Robbie, ever the ghost in the wires, had slipped a 50 to a nurse's aide at the hospice center where Daniel spent his final weeks. The woman was nervous but willing. I remember her, the aide said, referring to Emily. Always on her phone, never cried, didn't stay overnight once. Robbie asked about Daniel's meds. She managed them herself, the aide said. Didn't want us adjusting anything without her permission. Said she had a background in pharmaceuticals. But that didn't check out with the head nurse. Then came the most damning piece. She had a briefcase she kept locked. I saw her slip something in once. Looked like paperwork. Robbie got the aide to sign a statement. Meanwhile, Max was knee-deep in forensics. He'd sent the will, the one filed days before Daniel's death, to a handwriting analyst he trusted from an old case. 3 days later, we met in Max's garage. The air smelled of motor oil and secrets. She forged it, Max said simply. He handed me 2 documents. One was the will submitted to probate court. The other, a sample birthday card Daniel had written me, which Max had copied from my photo album. See the D? He pointed. Totally different curvature. And look at the T in Thompson. Hers is rushed. Danielle's was careful, rounded, Jean added. The notary who signed it, he's a family friend of Jonathan, not a licensed professional at all. Then Robbie pulled out a flash drive. Audio recording, he said. From a coffee shop downtown. He hit play. Emily's voice crackled to life. He's barely hanging on, John. I need to file this before the next scan. If the hospice changes his meds again, he might actually start talking. Then laughter. Jonathan's, just get the money, babe. That was enough. Max looked at me, eyes fierce behind his bifocals. We've got motive, fraud, forgery, medical neglect, enough to trigger a civil suit and possibly criminal charges. Jean crossed her arms. And guardianship of Tommy? Then, too, Max nodded. If we play it right. I felt my knees go soft. I sat down on a box of old depositions. All those months I'd questioned myself, wondered if I was imagining things, if grief was making me paranoid. But no, the truth had just been waiting for someone too old to matter, but too stubborn to forget. We spent the rest of the night preparing. Max would file an injunction on the will. Jean would leak the photos and recordings to a friendly news outlet if Emily pushed back publicly. Robbie would contact the probate judge anonymously with a tip. As for me, I would invite the entire family, Daniel's aunts, uncles, cousins, to dinner. One last supper, one unexpected reckoning. I cooked for 2 days straight. Roast beef, garlic mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, cornbread, pecan pie, all of Daniel's favorites. I used the same china set he grew up seeing on holidays. Even pulled out the cloth napkins Emily once called quaint. Is this a celebration? She asked as she stepped into my little rental house, dressed in a pencil skirt and fake humility. Of course, I said. A proper thank you dinner. She looked around at the long table, the extended family laughing and hugging. Daniel's Aunt Shirley, Uncle Lou, cousins from Akron. Even his godmother from Michigan had flown in. I wanted to honor Daniel properly, I added, with people who actually knew him. Emily smiled, her lips thin as wire. Well, that's thoughtful of you. She had no idea. Dinner started with prayer, Daniel's favorite hymn playing softly in the background. I said grace with a firm, steady voice. Thanked everyone for coming. We passed dishes, shared stories. The mood was warm, almost nostalgic, until Max stood up and cleared his throat. I hope you don't mind, he said politely, but Ruth invited me to share something. Legal clarification, if you will. Emily blinked. Max placed a stack of folders at the center of the table. As Daniel's former family attorney and longtime family friend, I feel it's important to set the record straight. He opened the first folder. This, he said, is the original will, dated 2021, signed by Daniel and notarized by an independent official. It clearly designates all property, assets, and guardianship to Ruth, his mother. Aunt Shirley gasped. Emily stood. That's ridiculous. The will was updated. Max raised a hand. Yes, and this, he held up a second document, is the forged version submitted by you. He looked her dead in the eyes. Signed during a time when Daniel was heavily medicated and barely lucid. Notarized by someone with direct ties to Jonathan Larkin. Emily's eyes widened. I don't know who that is. Jean stood up next. Funny, because here you are with him, on a yacht in Myrtle Beach, while your husband was dying. She dropped a stack of printed photos on the table. Gasps echoed around the room. Emily's mother, sitting at the far end, covered her mouth. Wait? Uncle Lou squinted. Is that the same week as the hospice? Robbie stood. Yes. April 4th. Daniel's records show a severe decline in organ function that very day. Emily told staff she was visiting family, but she was with Jonathan. Emily backed away from the table. This is slander, she said. No, I said quietly, standing now. It's truth. I walked around the table and placed a sealed envelope in the center. This is a letter Daniel typed 2 weeks before he passed. It was never sent. He was too weak. But he saved it in his email. I opened it and read aloud. Well, if you're reading this, I guess I couldn't find the words. Something's off. I feel like Emily's lying to me about the money, about the will. She doesn't want me to talk to anyone but her doctor. I'm scared, but too tired to argue. Please, if anything happens, don't let her get away with it. Love you. There was silence. Then Aunt Shirley sobbed into her napkin. Emily's face twisted, fury and fear colliding. You can't prove, Max interrupted. We already have. The handwriting expert's report confirms forgery. The witness isn't a notary, and the account linked to the hospice payments drained days before Daniel's death into an account under your name, Jean added softly. And there's a recording, Emily, of you and Jonathan planning it all. Emily staggered back, her chair toppled behind her. She looked around, eyes darting, as if someone might still defend her. No one did, not even her own mother. It's not what it looks like, she whispered. But it was. It was exactly what it looked like. A woman who had seen a dying man not as a husband, but as a hurdle. I stepped forward, held up a photo of Daniel holding Tommy as a baby, both of them smiling at me. You tried to erase me, Emily. But Daniel knew who I was. And now? So does everyone else. That was the moment it broke. The illusion, the performance, the mask. Emily didn't cry. She fled, grabbed her purse, slammed the door, tires squealing down the street. No one chased her. No one even moved. Just silence. And a table full of people finally seeing clearly. Max turned to me. We'll file first thing Monday. Probate court will freeze her access. You'll get back the house, the money, and we'll petition for Tommy. I nodded slowly, but I wasn't thinking about the house. I was thinking about the quiet boy who used to fall asleep on my chest during thunderstorms, and how tonight his voice had finally been heard. The courtroom smelled of old wood, paper, and the faint trace of perfume, Emily's, no doubt. She sat at the defendant's table, her hair perfectly curled, her blazer tailored. But her eyes were wild. She looked like a woman clinging to the last plank of a sinking ship. I sat across the aisle with Max, Jean, and Robbie behind me. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence was enough. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Pearson, shuffled through our case files with tired hands but alert eyes. We're here to determine the legitimacy of the amended will filed under Daniel Thompson, she said, and to examine the subsequent transfer of assets, as well as guardianship over the minor child, Thomas Thompson. Max stood with quiet command. He laid it all out. The forged signature, the fake notary, the money trail to Jonathan Larkin, the audio recording, the photos. Jean's article had already hit the local press that morning. Emily was infamous by lunch. Then Max handed over Daniel's unsent email. This, he said, is the voice of a dying man, and the last plea of a son who knew something was terribly wrong. Emily's lawyer, a frantic young man who looked like he was regretting every life choice, tried to object, stall, redirect, but the judge saw through it all. After hours of testimony and silence, and the click of evidence being passed between hands, Judge Pearson leaned back and sighed. Emily Thompson, she said, this court finds sufficient evidence of will forgery, financial fraud, and deliberate misrepresentation to the probate system. The amended will is nullified. Emily's jaw dropped. Furthermore, the judge continued, given the unethical behavior, emotional manipulation, and documented neglect, you are hereby stripped of primary custody of Thomas Thompson. A gasp rippled through the room. Full guardianship, the judge said, turning to me, is granted to Ruth Thompson, the child's paternal grandmother. I didn't cry. Not yet. My hands were clasped tightly in my lap, fingers trembling. You are also awarded full ownership of the estate and remaining financial accounts under Daniel Thompson's name, the judge added. Emily stood suddenly. This is a setup. She's manipulating everyone. I'm his wife. You were his wife, the judge corrected. And he was your victim. Emily's breath hitched. Her hands clenched at her sides. You can't take my son. But the judge had already struck the gavel. It was done. Emily screamed. Not words, just raw guttural sound. Like a woman who had finally realized the curtain had fallen and the spotlight was gone. She turned toward me. I loved him, she spat. You just poisoned him against me. I stood slowly. Looked her dead in the eye. You did that yourself? Emily crumbled. She wept into her hands, then ran from the courtroom like a child caught stealing. No shoes, no bag, no plan. Just disgrace. She left town that week. No forwarding address, no custody appeal. Just silence, which for the first time in her life might have been her most honest sound. The house was smaller than I remembered. Funny how that works. Grief makes everything feel bigger. The walls, the silence, the shadow left behind. But now, with the truth aired and the storm past, the house had shrunk back into what it once was, a home. I unlocked the front door with the original brass key, the same one I'd carried on a ribbon in my purse for years. The lock turned without resistance. For the first time in a long while, I stepped into my son's house without feeling like a trespasser. Boxes lined the living room. Emily hadn't taken much, only what she could carry in one trip. The furniture was still there. So was Daniel's jacket on the coat hook, and Tommy's toy car under the couch. But the energy had changed. It no longer belonged to a lie. It belonged to memory, to honesty, to Daniel. I started in the kitchen, that same kitchen where Emily once told me, "You don't need to cook. We have professionals for that now." Where she took my homemade pies and replaced them with store-bought tarts. Where she accidentally forgot to invite me to family dinners. Now, I wiped the counters clean, scrubbed the sink until it gleamed, lined the drawers with new paper. I opened the windows, let the air rush in like a baptism. I brewed tea, chamomile just the way Daniel liked it. The kettle whistled softly, a quiet hum that filled the space without demanding attention. Tommy was upstairs, napping, his small body stretched across Daniel's old bed, his thumb tucked into his palm. He didn't ask for his mother, not once. Children are wiser than we give them credit for. He knew. After all, he'd seen the truth before the rest of us. The bruises on Daniel's spirit, the absence of warmth, the hollowness behind Emily's smile. But now he smiled in his sleep. That was enough for me. I took the tea to the table, set it beside a notebook I'd found in the attic. Leather-bound, untouched. I opened to the first page and began to write. Dear Tommy, one day, when you're old enough to ask questions, real questions, I want you to have the answers. Not the ones written in court documents or whispered at family reunions, but the ones that matter. Your father was good, kind, quiet in strength. He deserved more time, but more than that, he deserved truth. You won't grow up hearing lies. Not while I still breathe. I paused, took a sip of tea. The steam warmed my cheeks. I don't need you to avenge him. I've done that in the only way I knew how, with patience, proof, and the stubbornness of a mother who remembers every bedtime story, every skinned knee, every time he said I love you, like it was the first time. All I want is this, for you to know that in every generation, someone must hold on to the truth, even if their hands shake, even if they're told they're too old, too soft, too polite. One person must guard the memory. In our family, Tommy, that person is me. And someday, maybe, it will be you. I signed it, Love Grandma, folded the letter, placed it in the notebook, tied a red ribbon around it, and slid it into the drawer beside the tea. The sun had begun to rise. I walked to the front door, opened it just enough to let the morning in. A soft breeze carried the scent of cut grass and something else, something clean, like forgiveness. I looked back at the table, the tea still steaming, the chair where Daniel used to sit, the light falling across the floor in long golden stripes, and I closed the door slowly, not to shut out the past, but to begin again, quietly, on my terms. If you've ever been silenced, if you've ever been dismissed, forgotten, or made to feel like you were just a mother, just a grandmother, Know this, your story matters, because the truth doesn't expire. Justice doesn't always come with a gavel. Sometimes it comes with a letter, a memory, a woman who remembers exactly what happened and chooses to speak. Welcome to Grandma, True Stories, where silence becomes strength and revenge comes with tea and time. Don't forget to subscribe and join a community where the quietest woman in the room finally gets to be heard. Because when a grandma speaks, the world listens.